Quick introduction to myself. I'm Dr. David McKee. I'm the CTO at Slingshot Simulations and chair of various working groups within OMG. So I'm going to look at some steps, practical steps, how we're considering you can handle get a grip on and understand the dark data estate. Really just getting a bit more practical off the great introduction we've just already had. But I would like to just pause for a second and start with just reinforcing why is this so important. We've heard a lot about the impact on businesses and so forth, but let me give kind of a few key factors here. Is one, from a cost perspective, data being stored as a business, you're paying to store that data. And if that is 60, 70, 80, 90% of the storage you're paying for, that could be an awful lot that you're paying for in AWS, Azure, OneDrive, you name it. That data storage contributes to carbon emissions every year as well. So that would be part of your emissions that you need to consider as your business, and it's unnecessary. And of course, we've touched on some of the other value, the frustrations that we've all been in. How many times have we recreated spreadsheets where actually we just couldn't find it before, and we're wasting time doing that, wasting time not being able to share information. So if we can get a handle on these things, the implications can be huge and really, really positive for us all. So from a Slingshot simulation perspective, we look at handling dark data with three key steps: discovery, cleanup, and utilization. So where is the data? How can we find it so we can then do something about it? What do we do to clean it up? And then how do we create value from that data easily? And these are some practical steps that I would just advise to take on board and think about how you might be able to apply them. In terms of discovery, there's two things that we particularly look at. First of all, we look across three dimensions. We look at what is data talking about. Is it talking about, might be warehouse orders, products. It could be travel information. It could be sales information. What is the context? What is it talking about? And how does it relate to other things in your business and your daily lives? Is it relating to things that are spatial? Does it relate to places where your business might operate, whether it is the location of your clients, whether it is sites, warehouses, you name it? And then the temporal dimension, time. When is it relating to? When was the data created? So that has a couple sub-dimensions to it. Is when was the data created? How long do we need to keep it for? And then the data itself, is it temporal? Is it referring to events? Might be orders. When did they happen? And how do we pull these together? Together, those three dimensions build a picture of how valuable that data is. But more interestingly than that, it also gives us an ability to actually look at how this data is related to each other. And one of the findings that we have found over the last 2 years looking at dark data is when you look at data in those three dimensions, context, spatial, and temporal, you can actually link data across your organization using a graph-based approach. So building a network, as you can see on the slides here, where your data sets might be each of these individual dots on the screen is a data set in one of our clients, and the lines in between the dots are the relationships between those files, between those different databases, between those different sources, saying actually there is a relationship between these. And identifying that there are relationships between these is indicative of value. It is indicative of usage. And conversely, everything that we see around the outside is indicative of inactivity, lack of use, and potentially a lack of value. So what we look at there is saying, actually, why are some of these files, some of these data sources, why are they not related to connected to anything? Do we still need them? Because if they're not connected and they're not being used, are they actually valuable? But the stuff that is highly connected to everything we're doing in this business is likely to be highly critical, and therefore we might actually want to have an extra backup of it just in case. So this is an interesting tool and a perspective, and very easy to pull together. Once we've got that, and we can use this approach to do cleanup. We can look at the data that is disconnected, these ones in the top of the screen, and say actually they're not connected to anything else. So can we just get rid of them? Or do we just need to do an audit of them? And then there might be small clusters of data that we see in the middle of the screen where there's a small cluster of data that's highly related. Maybe it was a project, but that project may have finished 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Do we still need the data? Or could we just have an audit report that summarizes it? What do we need? And this provides a really useful visual guide to diving into, exploring, well, what does our dataverse ecosystem, the dark data ecosystem of our businesses look like? And that, you could apply this. I've applied this on my personal OneDrive as well, and it is horrifying how much junk one actually has on there. Then we get to looking at utilization. So in order to drive value, we look at these 3 steps. So we look at how do we build a structured data lakehouse to help bring structure and organization across the data ecosystem within your organization. So how do we go from, you have data that's in OneDrive, data in SharePoint, Google Drive, Dropbox, you have data lakes, you have databases. How do we actually pull it all together, not pulling it into one location, but knowing where it is, having that map, like we saw a couple slides ago, to understand where it is, understand the formats of that data, not adding another dimension there. So we're not talking about just context, space, and time. We're also understanding the format of that data. Is it image data? Is it JSON, spreadsheets, CSVs, XMLs? What is it? And therefore, once we understand what that is, we can then look at building processes to make sure we can address one of the remaining biggest challenges, which is the fact that data is often incompatible with other tooling throughout organizations. And we end up creating duplicates of that data because we're converting it between formats. But if we're able to build a picture of what format that data is in, and therefore a set of practices as to how we want to store data in the future, we can start to prune that process, optimize that process, and build in automation in some cases, build in best practices, so we can get over to the far right-hand side and start creating value from that data, being able to generate insights from sales, be able to work out, well, where should we be putting our sales reps? How many orders should we be placing next month? Because actually we now know because we've been able to put our data together. And at Slingshot, our particular hypothesis is to use graph-based approaches. In this case, we talk about knowledge graphs to layer on top of that and understand how data is pulled together. All right, I want to just leave it at that and leave plenty of time for questions. Conscious we've got about 15 minutes left, but really thinking about these three concepts: discovery data, building up that knowledge graph approach, making sure you clean it up, and I'll give one quick anecdote to that before I finish, and then utilizing it to create value. And the anecdote I want to finish with is a question that hopefully every single one of us can relate to. Is particularly those of us who have kids and family, is how many photos do you have on your phone of your kids? But what percentage of those photos are you ever going to look at again? Particularly when you might have taken 3 or 4 or maybe a dozen photos to try and get your kid to smile. How many of those are you going to actually look at? But do we go through and prune that? Do we go through and clean those out? Clean out the fact that we've got thousands of photos of our kids because it's so easy to do. That's just one example of data storage we're paying for. It's a very small example, not really at the enterprise level, but hopefully it's one that we can all relate to, and one that we're probably paying for. It might only be $10 a month that we're paying for storage, but we're still paying to store that data. And if we even start with that small step, we can start addressing these challenges of dark data even in our personal lives.